Well, today on our Tech for Business podcast, Kyle, our CEO and president, and Todd, our COO and CISO, are joining us. And we joked before I started recording that it's AI, just constantly. Today, though, we're talking about how do you know if you're ready for AI? How do you sort of assess your business? So to kind of start off, Kyle, maybe you can give us a little bit of an overview of what does it mean to be ready for AI when it comes to business? What does that mean?
I usually start at, I think, understanding your data, how you use it, understanding your applications, and understanding then from there where AI could potentially assist and augment and automate the use of that data or procedurally within the system sides. In many cases, it's showing up now where a lot of the applications, the software vendors themselves and providers they're providing you the integration, they're providing you the option, they're providing you with the ability to either for a fee or, as part of a new version of the software, they're providing you access to it. We're seeing a lot of that come to fruition side of it. The other side, I think of it, is from the procedural and planning side of this, and Todd can go a lot deeper into it than I can from a compliance and the other standpoint. But I think having that understanding of how it can be potentially a risk to the organization and your policies and procedures needs to be a fourth. You need to be talking about it. You need to be having some discussions, and you need to start getting that in place so you have some forethought into knowing that people are probably using AI in some capacity, whether it's sanctioned by the business or not. You should probably have some procedures and controls around that.
Yeah, I was going to say, Todd, you're our voice of caution, maybe.
The paranoid one.
In this conversation. Oh, man. I mean, what's your thoughts on what does it mean to be ready? And sort of maybe what are some of those misconceptions or mistakes you see companies making?
I think it's really early still. And I think when we talk about AI, I think most people are still really kind of focused on the large language models. That tends to be the focus today. It's ChatGPT, OpenAI, Gemini, et cetera, which makes a lot of sense. It's the natural speaking AI. It is not the only kind of AI. So I'll just kind of put a little bit more wrapper on what Kyle was saying. I think when you're starting to get ready for AI, I think the first thing you kind of have to know is what is it that you're trying to accomplish? So when I say there's a lot of different AIs out there, there's some really basic things that are out there. So you've got things that can help you with compute and analytics, or you've got stuff in manufacturing. I was reading an article the other day about how the healthcare industry is using it for breast cancer. And they said that it removed the errors by something like 90%, which just seems astronomically high to me. But it's where AI can really hit and have some major impact. So when you're looking at how do you know if you're ready, is if you don't know where you're going to go, you probably are going to have a hard time getting there. So that would be the very first thing I'd have is, what do you intend to do? And if it's just an LLM, then I think you can basically start to a large degree of just playing around with it, whether it's Copilot or others. So I think that most organizations, I don't know that we've seen a ton of people do missteps because it's still a really early process, but what we're seeing is most people come to us and say, where should I start? And what we're typically saying is exactly what Kyle said, is once you know where you're going, it's understanding what data you have and whether you want that data to be private, or can you make it a lot more anonymous so you can put data into the large learning and use data in a manner that's more useful for your business without sharing any private. So I think those are the big things. And then, of course, what do you have access to is another really big one. But then typically what ends up happening is we tell people to do a really small pilot program, is get a small group together. It's basically the people that are going to get a lot of bang for the buck, but also have access to a decent amount of data so they know what they can get into. And that usually works really well. Some of the misconceptions that I would throw in there is, I was talking to the group before we joined too, is is what is the risk associated with the private data of an organization. Right now, and myself included, is to me, it was a data point. It wasn't like they've swayed me completely, but the article I was reading was saying that the risk isn't nearly as high as you think because of the way that they teach the language models. The likelihood of it using proprietary or trademark data is incredibly low because it's yours specific, and because it's yours specific, it doesn't fit into the large response capabilities of most tools. So I'd say that's one of the larger misconceptions is if my data is there, everybody's got it and it's just going to come spitting out. That's not how the models work. And I would say that's by far the biggest misnomer out there today. Again, I'm the voice of caution, so I would still be very cautious about it. I'd still write my policies saying, please don't use our data. Be patient. If you need to do testing on an outside system from inside our organization to start with, those would be good things that I would start with as well.
Yeah, I always liken it a little bit to, if you have your personal Google Drive or whatever, you should be storing your company documents in your own personal, Google Drive side of it. It's similar here. You shouldn't be just going to the standard Chat GPT and dropping in your, how your company's secret sauce or proposals or other sides with other company names or other very specific company data that you won't want out in the public. That's just the general logic side. If you want to use the public open AI and those other things for general queries of saying, help me write this general email sales that doesn't have any secret sauce of those things is probably completely appropriate. So I think just using some judgment of how you look at any other corporate data. If you wouldn't be just dropping it in a public sphere, somewhere else. Don't be just dropping it out there. I mean, that's the way I always like to look at it.
Yeah, I wanted to kind of expand on that briefly. I mean, one of the easy wins from my perspective as you're starting to get familiar with tools, how they work and whatnot, is basically exactly what Kyle said. Is one of the first things I did was, how do you get started on things? And I don't know how everybody works, but for me personally, I tend to stew on things a bit as I try to figure out how am I going to write this? How am I going to frame it? And then eventually I typically just start. Once I start, the flow happens and you can eliminate hours by just telling AI, hey, prop up a succession plan for this person going from a lead status to management, and then it'll spit it out. It's ridiculously how quick it is, and you're like, wow, I've got a framework. I've just saved myself at least a half an hour of messing around before I even did anything. So those are real quick, easy wins, and you can quickly understand how the tools are powerful and useful to you.
Yeah, there's a lot of quick wins in that side of it. I use very similar things. I mean, just from a brainstorming side of it, or just doing a prompt into the language learning model and saying, acting as, I'll pick on Todd, a chief operating officer, this, help me solve for this workflow or production build problem that entails this, and this is the intended outcome I'd like, and let it go. And it'll give you a really good basis starting point to go through, and then you can say, actually, I wanted this more of this or less of that model side. I mean, it'll save you hours in a great time, and none of that's proprietary. It's just using general best practice, information that's out there side, and again, you can shortcut a tremendous amount of fill in the blanks, but it still doesn't take away from your unique approach and your unique side. It's very easy to then personalize that to get the most out of your unique aspect of it. But as an augmentative, quick way to get things done, I mean, it's tremendous.
Yeah, I don't want to tangent too terribly far off, but I would share a nice, I'll go quick, another little anecdote is I have an employee who will write this is how I feel, and then he uses AI to he'll use the coaching function, if you will, to then translate it into something that doesn't sound rude, mean, or can be misinterpreted. So it does help in those ways too. But my favorite function of Copilot, for example, is you can use it to turn any response into a poem, and boy, that goes over like you wouldn't believe.
That is great. I expect that at the next meeting, a beautiful poem.
Everything's in a poem. All Todd's emails are poems now going forward.
I did share one with a coworker, and the response was, please send me all emails and poems going forward.
Yes. That is amazing. Yeah, I mean, there's so much that AI can do and so many different wins. How do you, as business leaders, you know, let's talk about like the culture, the company culture. How do you know that the company people are ready for it? Or how do you hold them back from certain things? How are we managing the people aspect of AI implementation, if that makes sense?
God, you want that one?
Yeah, that one's easy, no problem. I mean, obviously, I think the answer is going to be it depends on the organization where your culture
Yeah.
is already. I feel like our organization is worked hard over the last several years on building a culture of trust. And I won't get too terribly far into it. I'm not a thought leader on how to build accountability and trust in the world. I'm an IT nerd, but I do think that there is a lot of stuff that goes into it. So once you start to build the integrity of the organization, if you've got core values and whatnot, you can certainly build off of those. So for example, almost every organization I've ever worked with has integrity in the core values. Assuming that that's true, you can start to build off of saying, well, if you've got integrity, here's how we expect you to behave and use the tool sets. A little bit more tactical, operational. I mentioned it a little bit before too, but you can create policies that outline what your expectations are. So, for example, a typical AI policy is going to say certain things of use caution. So we did as we were starting to implement that was we were very clear on this is what our expectations are. And then if anybody tried to, we do have some sophisticated, you name it, the policy was then prompted. Before you continue, please make sure you understand the policy. And it starts to really start to build that in. The nice part from my perspective is people would then reach out to me and say, whoa, that scares me. What should I do? And I would say, please make sure you understand the policy. The main points I want you to be aware of are X, Y, and Z. But if you're comfortable with that, proceed. So that was one of the easy wins for us to begin with. It's obviously it's not as simple as that. I mean, some of the other things that we did operationally was we did do the due diligence. So we started with a small group. We started to see what we could work with, what we were getting for results. But then we took a deep dive into what do people have access to? Is there information in here we prefer not to? And again, that comes from my paranoid nature of I don't want everything to be out there. But it was a good fit, right? So once we were comfortable with you have access to the data you should, it made it much easier for us as an organization to proceed and feel comfortable that what's going into the tools and what's coming out is much more appropriate for our day-to-day use.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's accurate. I mean, we obviously still allow trust. We have the policy, but we don't block access to the ChatGPT, Grok, or Gemini, or any of those sites. They just met with the policy, so they understand it. So we're not, we're allowing them to utilize it and trusting they're going to utilize it in the proper manner side to do it, so they can still gain a lot of the benefits from it. On the internal side, we're engaging more Copilot licensing and those things where it's a licensed component side, and it does have access to internal sensitive data to assist within the application sides of it. You just don't want somebody to search, show me all the salaries, and lo and behold, somehow they had access to a payroll spreadsheet, that somebody dropped in SharePoint at some point, So we did do that to Todd's paranoid side of it to make sure that, those kind of queries or prompts didn't produce something we didn't want to expect. And those are similar conversations we have with customer sides is fortunately or unfortunately, the AI is very efficient side of it, and whether people realize they had rights to a particular sensitive piece of information or not, the AI is going to respond, and it will definitely find it, far more efficiently and far more. It's going to show up in the results that a person just wouldn't stumble upon in most cases. So it's good to re-verify permissions and access side of it before you just turn on these more advanced tools as they get released. So that was part of it. The only last comment I said on the people side of it is, as we're looking to put more of the assistance side of it, I think every organization feels the challenge of people's fear of being replaced by it, and that's a common theme that I think is going to continue to come through, and the line that we're doing, and I kind of let off at that is it's assistive technology. It's not meant to replace side with it. It help us gain efficiency sides where by helping make our staff more efficient, we don't have to potentially hire as frequently side, and we can scale out without additional hires potentially in some area sides because we're allowing our people to be far more productive. That's obviously, you hope for that side of it, but it's not there to replace individual sides of it. You can see so much tremendous assistance from the tool side of it, but we're not. Most of the power and all the AIs that we see doesn't remove the human from it. It is augmentative as much as anything is helping them.
Yeah, I'm chomping at the bit to jump in to kind of give an anecdote, but I was reading yet another article. Like I said, everything is AI these days. But to kind of highlight what Kyle is saying, are there certain parts of the soil that are already nutrient rich, and so they know to apply the appropriate amounts of fertilizer, whatever it can, pesticides, etc. So to Kyle's point, the tool is designed to do nothing but improve and make you much more efficient. I don't have to use as many pesticides. I don't have to use as much water. I can get through my day-to-day tasks in a much more expedited process. That's exactly what it's trying to do. And I've rarely seen an situation where it's going to replace something. I mean, if you take a look at how Google has changed things, I'll use the example of Google Maps. How if you're old enough to remember when you used to print out MapQuest and then you had your sheets of paper and driving through the streets, looking at your piece of paper and then looking up for the street signs, that's all changed with Google Maps and Apple's Maps and whatnot. That's the kind of change we're talking about. Mm-hmm. It's not something you normally think is going to be life altering, but the reality is that it is. It's a massive improvement to the way we do our day-to-days compared to the way it used to be. I should mention also, as we're flipping through the papers, we're trying to change CDs too. So we're driving, we're seating changing.
Yeah. Yeah, probably be CDs in that time frame, not a cassette tape. You're probably right. Yeah. But the other part that is kind of changing I'm talking about life-changing side is rather than Googling things now. I mean, mm-hmm. I like the Grok AI from X. That's my language learning model. That's where I go. I mean, that's where I ask information sides of if I want to know what NFL free agent signed today or those things. That's what I ask. I don't put it in Google anymore. I put it there, and find you get far more informational, far more intelligent results from that LLM than the Google results showing a bunch of web pages sides of it. And in fact, most of the websites now show you the AI answer before they show you the web links now, whether you're in Bing or Google, they're showing you those AI ones now. So, I mean, it's happening all over the place that you're interacting with an AI almost on a daily basis, whether you were intending to or not at this point. It's definitely there, but very helpful and very powerful. I think embracing the assistance of it instead of fearing the imminent replacement of my job is the right approach. Is it going to change industries? Yeah, it is definitely going to shift where people should be putting their skill sides on it, because I think simple task-oriented things that can be automated side of it will no longer require additional staffing and hiring sides of that. But that's happened for hundreds, over 100 plus years since the Industrial Revolution at this point. I mean, everything's continuously changing and the workforce changes. So I think that's just something you should always just be cognizant of where the jobs are moving towards as you're entering the workforce or looking for a career change. Just analyze where it's going.
Great points. I mean, the feedback that I've heard as we're starting to look at areas outside of CIT where AI makes a ton of sense is I've heard this feedback of, but I like doing that part of the job. And we're like, okay, well, time to level up, right? I mean, it's honestly, that's kind of my point. As so example is there's a lot of AI usage that are going to come into security that are going to really simplify it. So cybersecurity is very data intensive, and a lot of people, they call it fatigue on the security operations side, is people get fatigued from all the data. And so where AI is going to come in and assist is it's going to take care of 90% of the noise day in and day out, which means that if you're in that type of role, it's time to, luckily at CIT, we had already been going by that says that part of the job I actually really enjoy. And to Kyle's point is, this isn't new. I mean, look at what Ford did to the auto industry back in the day. Is that changed things significantly, and the world did change. And And people probably did lose some jobs, but they more likely moved into something else. And it doesn't mean that they weren't successful in their careers and what they provided to the world. It just ended up being something slightly different.
Yeah. I heard an analogy side of it, and I'll repeat it on that same line as when, speaking of Ford, when the automobile first came out, you had all the blacksmiths that were doing horseshoes and other things for the horses' sides of those, and some of them were cursing the automobile, thinking this is going to change and end our life. This is a horrible thing. We need to stick with the horse and buggy. This other sides. But then you had the group that saw the opportunity, and they opened service stations for the automobiles, and they understood look at all the value we can add, because they're going to need people to fix these cars, and they're going to need people to repair the wheels on these cars and go through those things, and then amass the automobile service industry, which has grown to be quite massive over the last number of years. So, and far bigger than the blacksmith, ever was. So again, it's just they leveled up. They leveled up and they stood back and saw the additional opportunity sides within it. So, and I think the quite simply side, the people who are going to have success going forward are the people that know how to use AI as the assistants, and they use AI in what they do. Them going up against someone who doesn't use AI, the person not using AI in any form is going to lose. I mean, they won't be able to keep up with the efficiencies of the people that are, So I think that is straightforward, obvious. I think you just have to engage, and I think you can take that to the whole company side of it. Companies that are using AI are going to outperform and win over companies who do not leverage AI in those sides of it. It's going to be just very, very difficult to compete. Outside of people right now, you cut hair, you paint, you put a roof on, AI is not going to touch you probably. And that, it may help you with job costs and other stuff to maybe outbid other people or be more efficient in some levels. But yeah, otherwise I think you gotta be willing to keep an open mind and look at it from efficiency and competitive business nature side of it. You need to take a hard look at it, how you can do it from a personal level and also from a corporate level.
Definitely. So we talked about the people and the fear and the moving forward and kind of adapting. So let's talk a little bit more about specific business or organization. So I mean, how do you know when your data is really ready for something like AI? Or how do you know that you have it in your budget for something like a co-pilot? I mean, how do you make those distinctions and decisions about your business?
Yeah, in the security world, there is a phrase that where you kind of go through an assessment process that you're doing, and they call it a business impact analysis, if that matters. But the concept's the same, even though I had a fancy name for it. Really, what you're doing is, where does it fit in the organization? What are we trying to accomplish? The stuff I mentioned before. And then as you're going through that, and we'll just use the comments that we had before of saying that we want more uncertain who has access to the payroll data. So you need to go do the analysis on it. You flagged it as a potential risk. Now you need to go back and say who has access to it and so forth. So there is an analysis process, a risk review, if you will, that you need to go through on what you're going to have for an impact as you start to roll these things out. But then once you've got that, you've got a plan. Now you can start to do the budgeting piece. Depending on where an organization is at, if you start with a small scale group, I'll use, again, Copilot as an example. It's not overly expensive. So if you start with 5 people, it's not going to be this financial burden that's really going to crush the organization. And you can start to determine whether this is going to have the benefits that you're looking for or not. I'll use an example that I've used with Kyle in the past is, if you look at your typical people that are in the executive level, they tend to have very busy schedules. And so while you look at something like Copilot and you go, I'm not really sure there's a huge benefit on there. If you use the example that I had that helped me build a plan to move somebody up through their succession planning, I can shave hours on investment that's hard to measure, but still significant. That being said, if you've got larger initiatives like the wine farmer as an example, that one you're going to have to put some serious effort into, right? You're going to have to actually plan for that. And I don't know what that costs, but I'll just say $100,000. do I have $100,000 to invest on that? And the answer is probably going to be, no, I don't have $100,000 of cash sitting around. So I'm going to have to plan how I get that, when I'm going to make that purchase, et cetera. I don't mean to implying it's going to cost a wine farm as an example in this case. But that would be it, right? So you typically, I can tell you from my experience in the working world, is CFOs and CEOs hate surprises. So if I popped up and said, hey, I've got this great AI initiative and it's going to cost us X, Y, and Z, they usually go, what? No, 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 thank you. However, if I happen to be in the budget cycle and saying, at some point, I think this is a massive initiative that we need to investigate, and I'm putting it out here at 2 years from now, this is what I think the cost is. Here's where I think the return's on. Now that I've framed it that way and I've said it's in the future, the CEO, the CFO can then say, I think the bang for that buck is tremendous. And while that's a great initiative, we need to pull that up. We're budgeting for that this year. That could happen, right? So the process of putting it into the budget is really where I think the rubber hits the road for that. Price them, make sure that you've got your pros and cons, go through a formal budgeting process, and you'll probably be very successful in getting your initiative in place.
Yeah, and I think the ROI side, it's generally labor savings, right? That's your example on saving you a couple hours to do the scale up of the individual side on writing a succession plan for somebody in those sides. Saving that, you're talking about hours of an expensive individual side of it. So it's the augmentative side of you're saving expensive resources, and time is of utmost value. Time is limited for everybody. You can't produce more of it. It is what it is. So if you're factoring in the ROI, what else can you do with that time? As long as you know whatever value proposition you can gain with that saved time, that can help with the potential justification for why it makes sense. The other side is just doing some analysis. So if you're looking at a more verticalized use of AI where it's part of the application, where they're going to say, we can help automate something. I'll use, for example, on our support desk. Our user onboard for a company comes in, and we're saying, for us to do that manually, they say they have a new hire and we need to go in and create their account in their Active Directory or an Entra ID, or we got to go assign their Windows, our Office 365 licensing. We got to add them to certain groups. We got to add them to a shared mailbox. We got to make sure you have all these permissions. We got to install these pieces of software. Let's say that normally takes 2 hours to go through. Looking at that in AI says we can do that in 20 minutes because the AI can do all the background assignments. The technician doesn't have to leave the screen. They can just populate with the proper values and commit. That's a significant savings of somebody that's, say, has a value of $35 an hour to the organization. You multiply that, those are real dollars in real time. And now can that expensive resource spend more time helping more complex problems that don't have the known variables that are far more complicated to work with? So it's just running through some of those cost analysis. You have to understand the savings or potential savings of what that additional automation can do more efficiently, track it back to the cost side of it. And then I think it makes the CFO's decision a lot easier to say, yes, this works well in our budget. This makes sense, because in many cases, those software vendors will charge you more for that function because there's value there for they have a strong pitch, because if you're saving that kind of labor, but in most cases, it's going to probably work to make sense to say, if we truly see those labor savings and we can invest that other saved time into other more productive things, i.e. better customer experience, happier customers, more customers without hiring, whatever it may be. Yes, there's a definite reason to make that investment.
Yeah, I loved your example there too, because I think one of the things that you kind of might have skimmed over a little bit is it also eliminates the rework. So that example in particular is heavily error prone because it is very manual. There's a lot of touch points in it. So it can get as complicated as, does this person deserve or should they have access to other systems that aren't your typical IT setup? And if you're automating that process, you almost never screw it up. Whereas an employee almost always goes, I missed this one group, and they have to go back and they have to make that change. So that lack of rework is a huge benefit as well. I did see another article, and I'll share it, so hopefully we'll add that to it. But for the ROI perspective, there was an article that I read that said 90% of CFOs find value and ROI in their AI projects. So it is going in the right direction. And currently today, there are CFOs that are saying, yes, this makes a ton of sense. And like Kyle just highlighted, there's some easy ways to prove that you can get the bang for the buck on them.
Yeah. Yeah. I just think I think it's easy to probably see the saving side. The other part of it that people, will have to monitor and pivot side is from the save time. Are they doing where is the value shifting towards right now? Are they spending the time efficiently as well? So that's why the people part's still there. I mean, that doesn't go away. AI took care of the simpler side. There's now a deeper side. And now as that person leveled up, are they doing more? In our case, I'll just use the tier 2, tech support versus tier 1 tech support. That's what we'd ask them to level up.
For sure. I feel like to really do our due diligence in this conversation, it's important to talk maybe about roadblocks or reasons to kind of slow your role in AI adoption. So what are some of those reasons to hit pause, or what are some maybe regulations or compliance or concerns like that really should be taken into account before you dive, straight into the deep end?
Cost. Also, a little bit tongue in cheek, but I mean, some of these things, there's the initial investment's definitely there. I mean, you're going to have to commit to investing into it. Copilot licenses aren't cheap. I mean, even just from that level, Todd used that example side of it. And again, whether there is obviously, you have some savings, but again, if you looked at your entire company, do you need a license for every person in your company? Probably not. There's more knowledge worker sides of those to be strategic where you license it. So there's definitely cost roadblock in front of it. You're just not going to have everybody just for convenience have access to Copilot, for example, nor are you probably going to just run out and add the AI add-on to whatever verticalized application you're using. Because again, I'm sure they're going to have a decent subscription cost that you're going to have to do some ROI adjustment for. So, which goes to Todd's budget side. That's you're going to have to probably do some legwork, some ROI calculations, some justifications, and then planning and budgeting to make sure you have, again, Todd's example, the $100,000 to make that investment side of it. And I can let Todd talk about the regulatory side because that's a whole nother one.
Yeah, I mean, from regulatory, it's still relatively early. I think everybody's starting to scramble for it and try to figure out what does this actually mean. But the implications from compliance in particular is naturally going to go to security and privacy data. I mean, that's just going to be the natural place. So if you're looking at anyone that's under a heavy regulation, healthcare, finance, the typical people that we talk about, government and so forth, you're going to have concerns about, is your data secure? How do you know it's secure? Can you prove it's secure? Is it anonymized? All of those things are going to be typical things. That's not different from a challenge for those organizations today, but you do have to consider it and prove it specifically for AI. So your security needs to be in place for all of those things as well. I mean, other challenges that you've seen out there, I'm sure plenty of people have talked about the hallucinations that are coming from AI. So there is the practicality of, am I getting good data? This actually falls back into the good point we had earlier about this isn't eliminating jobs, of that the data is valid and it's not making mistakes. There's also some concerns out there with the skill set for the tools. And Kyle kind of mentioned the leveling up pieces. This is going to be a big thing. Do you know how to use the tools? Do you know how to implement them? Do you know how to tune them? And so on and so forth. And so the infrastructure, the talent around inside the organization, those could be some significant challenges that while I've got the tool, I may not know how to implement it. I may not know how to make it more efficient, so on and so forth. So, I mean, the typical things that you would see for almost every project is definitely true here. There's just bigger concern behind it is it's still pretty new, and people, from our conversations, I would say the biggest thing that I see is most organizations say, I don't really understand what it does yet. And for what it's worth, I think this conversation was fantastic, kind of highlighting all the things it does, because we did a lot of use cases too. But that tends to be the biggest hurdle today is I don't really know where I'm going to get my wins from. So there's that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I would say potentially having an AI champion, someone who's super excited to learn, might just be a great place to start, because then their passion will just spread, and that would be a huge asset. Anything else, any advice you have, anything we didn't cover in this AI readiness conversation?
We covered a lot of ground, like that. We definitely
there's so much more,
yeah. We could definitely keep going deeper and deeper, but I do think it was a good. We touched a lot of different bases and a lot of different use cases and examples of how to leverage it. So hopefully it gives some people some more food for thought, at least. So
yeah.
And I think the one thing that I'd add is, if you're not the passionate one, if this is not your pet project, just be open to people bringing it to you, saying, hey, I'm really excited about that. Hear them out, listen to the ROI, and if it does make sense, then start to build your plan. But my feeling is you don't need to be afraid of AI. There are risks associated, but as long as you're conscious about it and you work through it diligently, that was a tough one for me to get out. As long as you work through that diligently, you will be prepared and you will be successful. You'll have the security and all the things in place that are appropriate. So just be open to the ideas. And there are, like I said, there's a ton of use cases out there. It's an exciting time. I know it can be a little terrifying, but I'm pumped about it. I think the abilities that we're going to get from it are pretty darn amazing.
Seems like every day there's more popping up. There's more popping up every day. So
yeah,
very exciting.
Well, thank you both for joining us today.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us today. If you enjoyed this topic, please let us know. Like, subscribe, or reach out to us at info@cit-net.com, or head out to our website, cit-net.com/podcast. We'll be back next week with an all-new episode.